Hey everyone, Jordan here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Leader Seeds podcast, where you can always find great conversations around high impact and healthy leadership. Now I have two questions for you. And the first question is, do you have a healthy understanding of marketing? Second question, do you believe that there is a power in storytelling? You see, I want you to pay attention to those two questions as you listen to the entirety of today's conversation, because Kurian will tackle those questions and will give his insight over the 27 years that he's had in the sales and marketing industry. I'm talking to Kurian Matthew Tharakan, and he is the founder of the sales and marketing firm called Strategy Peak Sales and Marketing Advisors. Like I said, he's a veteran for 27 years in the sales and marketing industry. He's consulted for companies in numerous sectors, and Kurian is also the author of the Amazon bestseller, The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell, which details how anyone can move people and mountains with the power of story. So listening closely as he shares his insight and his experience over the time that we have in this conversation today. And I also want to encourage you, as soon as you pick up on something and something resonates to you, go ahead, like and subscribe here to the channel. That way you don't miss out on anything else that we have. We got a lot of great conversations coming up this year. With that being said, let's go ahead and check out the conversation. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leader Seeds. It's me, Jordan, and today I hope you're ready for a great conversation, because as I was talking to Kurian the other day, there was a lot of really awesome points that he shared with me about storytelling, and I'd even say the power of storytelling. So Kurian, I want to thank you for being on today's episode at Leader Seeds. And we usually start these conversations with something really just random, just a general question in the beginning. So the question that I had for today is there a story that you could remember that you was told as a child?
That I was told as a child. Well, I think there are many stories, but some of the most common are some of the most memorable as well. And they're memorable for a reason, because they hold deep truths, deep meanings. They're resonant. There's all sorts of different things, and you just simply have to go to a trove of fairy tales and stories within movies and such. And I remember gathered around the television when I was a young kid, and color television had just become affordable at that time, in the mid 70s, right? So everybody we had a black and white before this, but you gather around and we'd watch The Wonderful World of Disney. And they'd always do the different types of movies. They'd shorten them up for the 1 hour format, and such. But Davy Crockett and all these kind of things. So there's many stories, but the ones that are most prominent in your minds are the ones that have been the most entertaining first, but then have contained deep meaning thereafter. And that's why fables survive throughout time. And you and I were talking actually about Little Red Riding Hood. And in fact, we think of that as a European story, but it's actually a pan-cultural story. Almost every major culture has a version of Little Red Riding Hood. There's Asian versions of Little Red Riding Hood. There are African versions of Little Red Riding Hood, right? Because it contains a fundamental truth that all children should listen to their parents. That's what they're trying to communicate. Yeah.
I love it. Because just like how you said, after our conversation last time, it really stuck with me when you see these universal truths and you see these stories that actually cross culture, like you said, right? They have a presence, they have I guess a longing throughout the years, regardless of how things shift, where it just takes this place in cultures. And for me, I didn't really see that until you pointed that out last time. And then now when I take a look back in it, it's like, it's so true. These stories that have this universal truth to it, just like you said, right? All children should listen to their parents.
Yeah.
And it kind of finds its root and its base in cultures. And Maybe that's why I'm really even more excited about today's conversation. So thank you for that answer about stories as your childhood. I think it's so cool connecting that as we grow up, and it kind of gives us a sense of what where we are today and what you're working on today. And the book that you wrote, right? You wrote a book about storytelling, and I'd say about the power of storytelling. And that book specifically is called "The Seven Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell." So today, I really love to kind of dive into that, and if you can share, maybe just to start, how that started. I know sometimes I've heard authors say books kind of take its course from when you initially have an idea to when you actually have it printed out, and I love to hear a little bit of that story.
Sure. It's actually a sad story. Uh, it ended up to be okay, but at the beginning, I wrote it for a very sad reason, and it was ego driven. I wanted to become an author. And so the book I started writing, I quickly, it was a horrific experience for the first 6 months because I just couldn't get it out there. But I realized that I was writing a book for ego purposes and not for audience purposes. And when I turned that around in my head, this is not about me. This is about my audience. That's when it all started coming together. So the book I started writing is not the book I ended up writing. And so the book itself, at the end, the seven essential stories charismatic leaders tell, that wasn't the beginning topic even. I don't even know what the beginning topic was. But the seven essential stories, it just struck me that these were the fundamental stories in a framework that my clients, I'm a strategic marketing consultant, that my clients, these startup entities, these spin-off entities, needed to convey to not only their people but their market. So it's a leadership book, but internally it's a leadership book about how to communicate to your people and imbue them with a sense of purpose, passion, mission. And it's also an external facing book as well. It's about developing market leadership, and it's the same basic stories. The stories answer primal questions in your audience's head. And so, if you take a look at the great religions of the world, and many years ago, one of Apple's original marketing consultants, a fellow by the name of Regis McKenna,
Hmm.
Regis said that great marketing takes its cues from great religion. And what that simply means is that, religions, the big religions, right now. And so you have Christianity at the most populated. Then you have Islam, so 2.1 billion, 1.8 billion. But the bigger religions have very, very resonant stories. Now you got to remember, 2,000 years ago, the early Christian community were just a bunch of other zealot nuts, right? And then
Mhm.
they became this very large movement, and in large part, movements thrive because their big ideas thrive, and then their key messages thrive, and then their resulting strategic narratives thrive. And so we take a look at these, the big three religions. You can say they're Abrahamic. There's Christianity, Islam, and Judaism.
Mhm.
They have a very strong story complex behind it, but they answer the primal questions in their adherents' heads. That's why they are allowed that they thrive.
So with that kind of premises, and first of all, thank you for sharing the origin, like how you said, so authentic, and I love that in your communication. On just identifying that place of when you first started on the journey with the book, it was from a place of ego. You had something to say, but until that shift changed, and you really was more interested in what the audience was asking.
Yeah.
It might seem like a simple shift, but it's a powerful transition, right? When we start to look at, like you said, kind of like the floodgates were open once you made that shift by just looking at what is the audience asking? What is the people that you're trying to help? And then that shifted everything else there. But as you kind of shared, I'd love to stay on and maybe recap some things that you touched on really quickly, because there's a lot of really, really, really awesome points. So the first thing I like to dive in is when you mentioned about like, so marketing. How would you define marketing? There's some people in Leader Seeds community that will just they connect with it automatically. And sometimes I think it can be misunderstood. So how would, being that that's your field expertise, how would you define marketing?
Well, I have a lot of deep feelings on this, so brace yourself. The marketing has gotten a very bad reputation in the past 30, 40, 50 years. It's very much perceived as manipulative, sales-ish, selling people things they don't need, all sorts of things. But marketing in its original days, where it became a scientific process, which is maybe 120, 130 years ago, it is about creating the right product with the right features, with the right benefits, for the right needs, for the right audience, for the right. And all those rights, if you take a look at it, makes marketing in its original form strategy. It's actually about strategy. Marketing is strategy. Now, there are components of marketing that we can all recognize: communication through advertising, perhaps, or maybe jingles, through promotions and various things. So we very much have a madman type of perspective on advertising. So everybody thinks of it as Don Draper's territory. Well, that's the furthest thing it is. That's the last thing it is. At the beginning, it's all about creating immense value, because all these right features, benefits in a product fitting the needs, aspirations, desires of your audience, and all these rights create strategy. And then you might communicate it by hiring a Don Draper. But we have to create that value proposition stack well before that, so that we have product market fit. And once you have product market fit, advertising is real easy. When you don't have product market fit, then then you're relying on manipulative con games and selling people what they don't need.
Right. So it's at the core of it. If I and correct me if I'm picking up on this correctly, like after you kind of shared that, I love that, because I think that's really needed. I think it's really needed. I agree with you. Sometimes it can be taken off on a bad sense, because people or something have taken marketing off on a bad sense, in a sense. So people's experience with it is more manipulative than anything else. But the powerful thing is that at the core of it, like you said, if you start right with the right message, with the right product for the right people, if you start right, and the core of it is built on what I would call good character, right? Then your communication and marketing is good, right? You can use the same thing for good. Right?
It's authentic. It has integrity. And you can feel good about what you are doing. So you're not out there simply to sell a product. Your product and services are actually in the business of transformation. And that's a completely different way to look at something. And hopefully it's positive transformation. Most people should be in the business of positive transformation. But I will tell you that the Al-Qaedas and the ISIS of the world also engage in marketing.
Right.
And they have to communicate their messages to their adherents. Now, we may not like that, but the process and the tools are agnostic as to the purpose of what they are used for. It's the same thing, though. It's, in both senses, whether you are ISIS or Al-Qaeda, or whether you're Procter and Gamble, or whether you are the Pope, what you're really trying to do is to make your audience come alive with the mission, the vision, the purpose of what you are trying to accomplish.
Right. That's a really good place to start, I think, and a good place to kind of draw some foundational baseline on, because, depending on who's listening to this, we can hear some certain trigger words and kind of make some quick assumptions that we got to check once in a while. We have to say, okay, wait, is that the right way of seeing it? Because like you said, in either hand, it can end up in different ways. But the basis of it, the basis of communication, the basis of strategy and marketing is really built on, it kind of magnifies who that person is at their core. I'm coming back to like how you started with us, where everything shifted when you first was looking at your project and you was more kind of just wanting to get a book out. And then a major shift happened when you was like, hey, wait, what is the audience asking? And how do I give the audience what they're asking? It's like the whole shift turned from an internal to an external scene. I would even say on kind of like a servant, like wanting to serve people, right?
I was going to actually say that as you were talking. It is about serving your audience. It's not about selling your audience. It's about serving your audience, even on topics that they may not know yet that they need to hear about.
And that's a great leadership component, right? like kind of anticipating where they're going, maybe some obstacles or something that some questions they may be asking.
And in fact, a great leader will know the subject matter better than their people, their audiences, whoever they're serving does. And we can use a real simple example here. You're a dad, and your daughter comes to you. Your 14-year-old daughter comes to you and says, "Hey, Dad, I just found a great car. When I get my learner's permit, I want to buy this car, and that'll be my car." And you say, "That's great, honey. What's this car? What?" "Well, it's blue and it's cute. It's a two-seater," and those aren't the right answers. We still don't know what this car is about. And then you get to the final, more tougher question. "Honey, what kind of car is it?" "Well, it's a 1969, whatever the cheapest model of car was, and it's only $1,200. Now she is ecstatic because it's cute and it's blue and it's affordable. Now, what do you know that your daughter doesn't know? Where are you going to park it? What is the maintenance going to be on this 40-year-old car? Is it safe? The safety standards in 1969 are not the same as safety standards in 2021. And just a whole plethora of questions that your daughter is oblivious to. And so you have to know the situation better than your audience does. And then to be able to anticipate the unsaid questions or the unthought questions. They just haven't even thought about it because they don't know what they don't know. So a leader has very broad responsibilities in protecting their people, creating vision for them, creating safety for them, creating opportunity for them. And unless you know that situation better than they do, then you are basically the blind leading the blind at that point.
Right. And I mean, when you say that, that should definitely catch a lot of people's attention because, anyone with that wants to lead for a good purpose, wants to serve other people, never wants to be the blind leading the blind, or they never want to be led by the blind, if they're blind in a sense. So on either seat, on either positioning, it's not a good situation. So thank you for that story. What a perfect analogy, if you'd say, about kind of giving everyone here listening in a good idea of why it's not just about answering the questions that people are currently asking, but it's anticipating the ones that they're leading to maybe the unknown, right? There's an unknown field of where they're going to. When you were sharing that, Kurian, two things came to mind, and maybe help me unpack that if you can really quickly. And it just popped in my mind. I was thinking there's the real-time leadership, the day-to-day coaching, when you're, same analogy, that father kind of guiding that conversation with the daughter. But then there's also the storytelling part, maybe the marketing, I'd say, that you build a story around what's anticipated. So it's not real time, but it's anticipated time.
Sure.
You know where things are going in a sense. So you want to build a story around that because like any great story, any fable, anything we've grown up hearing in a sense, there was parts of the story that made sense to us today. And there was kind of seeds in that story that was planted. So when we walk through it in life, that story recalled back in our mind. So
exactly.
Maybe help me unpack that a bit, that real-time story, and also maybe that preparation for marketing in a sense, or communication or strategic narrative. I think I like that component of marketing. How does that play into crafting a story that serves your audience?
Well, I don't know if it's real-time stories. It's probably real-time storytelling. And it's slightly different because you should always have a plethora, like a quiver, a bundle of stories available to you to illustrate different management leadership principles or whatever it is that you're trying to do. And again, the only way that we can understand our world or anything significant within it is by the stories we tell ourselves about it. Now, if we don't have a story to tell ourselves about it, then we make up the stories. And, made up stories may not be the stories that you as a leader want your people to have. So you have to provide that story. So what is the stories that you will have in your quiver, your bundle that you can apply? Now, in my company, so I have a couple of different companies that I participate in. I'm an owner in, and one of them is a digital marketing agency. And we run our entire ship on a management basis on the stories we tell. Because there's the principle, and principles are usually boring, but stories are never boring. As long as it's well told, stories make the principles come alive. So one of the stories that we have is all about, and is the FedEx story.
Hmm.
What is the FedEx story? And actually, it's the Emory Worldwide story. Okay, but
Okay.
my people forgot about it and said instead it's the FedEx story. I don't care. But I'll give you the Emory Worldwide story. Emory pioneered containerized shipping in the 50s and 60s. So instead of doing loose packages, put it in a standardized container and ship it out. The problem was on regular audits, they would find that the cube, the containerized shipping unit, was regularly filled to less than 45%, usually 42%, etc., which means the cube is going out unfilled for the most part.
Okay.
You're losing money, on this. It's just not very efficient. So they tried everything to get their people to comply. The rewards, penalties, talkings to, all these kinds of things. Nothing
Right.
worked until they tried one very specific thing. They drew a line in the container, filled to this level. And now everybody knows what to fill it to. Now, my people remember that story, which is all about make the goal line visible. That's the principle. Make the goal
Wow.
line visible.
Mm.
That is the principle. And all we have to say is FedEx. Now it's really Emory Worldwide, but I don't care.
Sure.
When they say FedEx, everybody knows. Yeah. We got to make it visible. They know what that principle is. So stories make things come alive, and stories make the principles memorable.
Wow. That is such a great story of a great story.
Yeah.
That thank you so much for sharing that here. And I always like to kind of reference talk to our listeners as they're in the conversation with us. So if you're listening into this, there's a few things that I'm guessing may have popped in your mind for those that's listening to the podcast right now, or you're watching it live. And you as you share that, Kurian, it's like the principle, right? You said there's a principle and it's a story. And I'd say the story sticks longer. That's kind of what popped in my mind. But it's like, so the principle was to make the end goal clear. Is that correct?
And
Like,
make the goal line visible.
make the goal line visible. Okay, thank you.
Right.
So that's the
Yeah.
principle. But no matter what they tried with other tactics and different approaches, it wasn't, not even that was visible. It wouldn't stick until they told the story and people could relate in a story. When you told the story, I put myself in the story. I felt like I was there looking in a container and seeing
Yeah.
that. How much of that component do you think happens with people as they're hearing story? And I'm wondering if that's the true effectiveness of it, is that people actually are participating in the story that they're hearing.
Right. And in fact, you have, if you go to a movie, a movie is a story in visual and audible form, right? It's these things, and it may be a sensory experience, a full sensory experience. Ultimately, you want to be able to immerse your people, the audience, in a full sensory experience, completely precipitated by their own imagination, as they hear the cues through the
Right.
story. The characters, the inciting incident, the overall plot, the muddles along the way, the threat, and they will create that meaning. So it becomes a holistic sensory experience. You're engaging all of the different things that people use to feel their way around the world. That's how all these inputs. So the better a storyteller you are, the better you will be able to create that memorable, long-lasting experience. So when I said about movies, one of the big thing about going to a movie these days is not about spending 14, 15, 16 bucks on your tickets or 30 bucks on your popcorn. It's
Sure.
about wasting your time, over 2 hours sitting in a theater with rude people behind you. There's all sorts of problems. But we've all had the experience of being completely immersed in a movie, and
Yeah.
you have rapt attention, and you forget that what's on the screen is not real.
Mm.
Is not real. You are just completely. And every so often you'll come back and this a movie. Then you go back in, and that is the sign. That is the height of an incredible director and production team, and the visuals and the auditory. The music and all that kind of stuff. It is an immersive experience. You want to be in the immersive experience. Now,
Wow.
with you and I right now, I could be really boring. I could tell you all about storytelling, and how you should do the different principles. Or I can say to you, Jordan, like it's important for you to create an immersive experience in your audience's head. That's how you will make them come alive. Now, what would you rather me do? I have an idea.
The second
Yeah,
one,
there you go.
the
Right.
one that
Yeah,
we've
there
been
you
doing.
go. Yeah. So this, I was telling my team the other day that, when they are with their clients on their coaching calls and such, and so it's a digital marketing agency, we are in the energy transfer business. We're in the energy transfer business. And sometimes it's a calm energy, sometimes it's an excited energy, but it better not be a boring energy.
Mm,
Right? It
mm.
can't be a boring energy. And if it's a boring energy, people quickly lose interest. And as interest wanes, functional relevance wanes, emotional significance wanes, and it's very difficult to get that back.
Wow. The fact that you kind of guided us through, I'd say, the importance and the prominence that movies can have in our life, like good storytelling. We're talking about stories, and I would think if I was in your shoes, I don't know if you'd answer this the same way I would, but I think, like the big challenge, we all have a challenge with something we're passionate for. So the challenge for marketers, for marketing, is distractions, because everyone's distracted nowadays. So how do you keep people's focus? And if you, what a beautiful example about a movie. People will spend hours undistracted, actually pushing out other things, right? To sit there, to pay more money for popcorn, to pay more money for a seat, but to stay focused and to
Yeah.
push away other distractions. What a major shift if you think about it. And how intentional are they in putting together this hour to 3 hours of movie to tell a story? Now, the challenge sometimes, I was telling, this is the dad in me. I was talking to my children
Yeah.
about that, where we don't want to always take our entertainment for our education. But if we spend so much time in that, that's where people learn these principles that I don't know where I learned this, but it was from a strong movie they seen. And
Mhm.
this principle became so true in their life. And it's hard to shake it, but it's a favorite movie when you talk to them. It's attached to a
Sure.
favorite movie they spent time on and they watched over and over again. So taking the same example, tying it back to like how we can be proactive in our life. We can be the leaders in our life as first and foremost the story we tell ourselves. I think that was a beautiful place to start. I align 100% on that. What are the stories we tell ourselves, and are we intentional with it? And then the stories we're telling the people that we are um, able to lead. Energy transfer business.
Yeah. Every one of us.
What a I'd say what a clear positioning, really understanding that there's nothing else we're doing, but we're transferring energy. And it's also maybe even empowering, Kurian, when you say that, because we're not in the energy, we're not here receiving. If the other person is kind of in a whole sense, then I'm receiving that energy. I feel victim to it, but I can actually be proactive with it. I can be intentional with it, is what you're saying, right? We're
Yeah.
in the
We're
energy transfer business.
we're all radiating energy at all times.
Mhm.
We just are. Unless you're dead, you are radiating energy. It may be a low frequency energy, or it can be
Right.
high frequency energy, and it could be on multiple channels and all these kind of stuff. And that's what creates entertainment. Okay. And when you embed within entertainment the management principles and the missions and the visions and all this kind of stuff, now you've got context and you've got a medium to allow people to absorb what you want them to absorb. And that's what we're really getting at. There's so many ways to tell stories, but ultimately, the only way you can tell whether your story has worked is by response.
Mm,
The
mm.
meaning of communication is response. And that I didn't make that up. I learned that somewhere. I think it's a neurolinguistic programming principle. But the
Mhm.
meaning of communication is response. So if you're not getting the right response, your communication is not working. And all I'm saying is that the primary method of communication, for real profound change in especially in mass movements, let alone buying your products and services, is to measure whether you are getting the actions out of your people that your intended communication wanted to get.
Wow. So there's a huge component. There's a part of marketing that we can see as just pouring out, like talking or communication. But it's seeming like the shift after you shared that, there's much more of an emphasis in observing and listening to what's being received, right? Because we
Absolutely.
can be pouring out, but it's like what is being received, what is being caught, and how much of it is intentional and how much of it is off the mark, and how do we continue to improve in that sense, correct?
Yeah, you have to, and so we're all radiating energy, and we're also it's like a transceiver. You're not a communication device. You're not a receiving device. You're both. You're a transceiver, transmitting and receiving at the same time. What are you transmitting and receiving? Energy.
Right.
And when you are in sync with somebody in a communication, your energy feeds off each other. That's what
Right.
happens, right?
Right.
And so it's a dance. It becomes
Right.
a dance at that point in time. And so if you're only transmitting, that suddenly, you better have very strong self-esteem, because if that signal isn't being picked up, you're probably boring the heck out of them, and that's what's happening, right? So, but
Right.
when you're a transceiver, you are in a complete and beautiful dance of communication with your
Right.
audience, and it's back and forth. I've been in front of audiences, so I speak quite a bit, and I've been in front of audiences where I've completely bombed. And
Right.
and every comedian has this experience as well. Every major comedian will be able to tell you that. But you're on the way to bombing when there's no feedback from the audience, and you're on the way to succeeding when the audience is right there with you, and you are in sync, and you feed on each other. And as you feed on each other, there's new things that occur to you in the moment outside of the script.
Wow.
That's what really creates those inspirational moments.
Mm.
Now, you and I met a couple of days ago. We went through a pre-interview and such. We're completely off any script that anybody intended to have you. We're having a
Right.
conversation.
Hmm.
I'm promoting a book. We barely promoted the book because that's not what it's about. It's not about the book. It's about me. It's about you and us serving your audience.
Right.
Isn't that what it's
Right.
about? So we have to create the value in the entertainment first,
Right.
but then intersperse that. And the entertainment is the medium,
Yeah.
right? Because and entertainment doesn't mean you're laughing. It can also mean that you have rapt attention. It can mean that you have curiosity. You have a little bit of, fear, intrigue, whatever it is, just the way you would have in a Stephen King novel.
Okay.
It could be all these kinds of things. But the entertainment is the medium, and then you
Yeah.
insert the messages that you want along the way. Can I
Wow.
give you
Wow. I
can I
love
give you an
that.
example of a radio show in Africa?
Yes, please, please.
Okay, let me give you a radio show in Africa. In fact, you'll see this in a number of different places where you have very forward-thinking writers on dramatic shows, whether it be radio, television. I can think of Coronation Street, for example, out of the UK. That might be an example of that. I forget what this radio show's name is in Africa, but they deal with a lot of very, very real issues. One of them was about domestic violence.
Mm.
Okay, domestic violence. Now, hopefully, none of us are experiencing domestic violence day to day in our situations. If you are, please seek help immediately. But in large part, we don't know what to do in that situation as observers of domestic violence. We don't know what to do. Do we call the cops? What will happen to the kids? After, will they be put into foster care? There's all sorts of things. But you should do something. And so this radio show actually, and these are villages in Africa. These aren't cities and things like that, although they broadcast that. But this is one of the primary means of entertainment. It's a very popular show. And in one of the episode story arcs, over several episodes, the people in the village regularly heard the husband doing not so good things with his family. And these are these hot villages, right? So what do you do? What do you do? And in the drama, in the radio show, they showed the people gathered around the village hut, the hut where the bad things were going on, and they brought out their pots and pans and they started making a bang, 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 racket, bang, bang, bang. And pretty soon that hut is surrounded
Mm.
by neighbors who are clearly telling the man, "We hear you, we don't like it, and you are being watched. And that is, and in a large part, these people that perpetrate these kind of acts, I'm not an expert on this, but in large part, they do it because they think no one will intercede. They do it because they think that no one outside of the family hears them. But here's what happened. Now, the success of that program was actually based in how many incidents thereafter in other villages, in real life now, of people banging their pots and pans when they heard exactly the same kind of thing happening in their own little village. And that's the power and transformation of story, to intercept a situation that we may not know how to handle. And this was all based on a drama.
Wow. And that came off of a radio story from Africa?
Yeah, it's based on a radio show in Africa. Yeah,
Radio
that
show
deals
in
with a lot of issues, and it has a lot of societal issues
Yeah.
that people. And I read about that a few years back. It really stayed with me because, in large part, we don't know how to react in foreign situations, but it's not foreign to everybody.
Right.
It may be foreign to you because you've never faced it before, but I guarantee to you, in the last 10,000 years of human civilization, the last 15,000 years of human civilization, that there have been millions of people going through exactly what you're going through.
Yeah.
No, I think there's probably, I don't know, it's 105 or 100, 120 billion people have been on Earth in time, modern humans, right? Somebody's gone through what you've gone through. I guarantee it. Now let's bring about what all the best practices and the best ways to handle those situations are.
True. Very true. Another powerful story. I think today's episode is going to be packed, and I love the topic of the power of storytelling. That's what's ringing in my ear after you share that story. What happened with the pots and pans, and I think it really hits home for me. If anyone else is listening here, is if the purpose of it. Yes, there's a lot of fun. Yes, there's entertainment. Yes, we're joking. We're trying to figure out ways to connect, right? Marketing is how are we connecting with people? Like you talked about too, it's authentic. There's integrity in it, and it addresses real life problems. Like I'm thinking about the pots and pans of that. I think about the neighbors that's banging it. And I can almost hear it, if I'm putting myself there. But I'm also thinking about the people in that home that was experiencing that domestic violence,
yeah.
and the freedom that they had, the peace they had, because they were taught how to respond. Like you said, people knew that was not right, but they didn't know how to respond to it.
They didn't know how to respond.
So when you teach them how to respond, when you teach people collectively how to do something, and then everybody can come together, you're really addressing some real life problems that actually help a lot of people. Like I'm just thinking about the freedom. I'm trying to really put myself in the shoes there. I don't know. The picture I had was just a mother and children. And that's just the common picture I guess I had. But the fear that they'd live in every single day because of the silence, because no one knew, people cared, but no one knew how to respond.
Right.
So and we can teach people through storytelling how to respond in a way that is alignment and integrity in their heart, like what they want to do, but they're stuck. They don't know how to do it. They can really help real life problems, right?
Yeah. Storytelling is the primary medium to understand our world, and it is a powerful driver of societal change. It is that's what it is. It is the way we understand our world. Is the way we change our world.
You said, did you say powerful driver of societal change?
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
The reason every major movement that you have seen that has driven societal change began with a story. Begins with a big idea, a set of key messages, and then a set of strategic narratives that people can imbue their minds with and infect in a good way. You're allowing people to build an immunity now, and also a direction to go forward. So you know how to do it, just like pots and pans. What do I do? And so now these movements have these stories that are driving forward based in principles and big ideas. And so take a look at something like civil rights. It's simply that, it's based on this one principle in the Constitution, your Constitution. And that is, we hold these principles as self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Right.
And it's staring everybody in the face. And it took up to the 50s and 60s for it to be brought to a ground level, by people that are still being oppressed by other people that don't hold the principles of the Constitution as sacred.
Sure. And I think an important thing that I pick up on, this is just a personal review, and I say the power of learning this, the power of learning the power of storytelling, if I say it in that aspect, I say is empowering because we can understand when it's been, when we could be, when it could be used to guide us off course, when it could be used, like how you said, if the basis sometimes is of good, then awesome. But sometimes it can also be used for bad or for manipulative
Absolutely.
reasons, right?
Yes.
But we don't even see that if we don't understand that there's intention behind it and there's thinking behind it. So it actually empowers us to make better decisions, to know, hmm, as a child, the parent is telling them a story because they want them to have good hygiene and brush their teeth in the morning. So it's using
Right.
a story. That's a good thing. But as at the same time, we can be told stories that put us in bad situations for other people's reasons. So, but it's not even clear. It's not even insight without really understanding this first basis, the power of storytelling. I'd love for you if we could spend some time in today, because there's so much that kind of came up that I'd love to dive more into, but I really wanted to cover, if you could share, I think it's seven, right? It's just really quickly, the seven essential stories, like how you said, that charismatic leaders tell, and maybe just a
Sure.
framework of it and how you came with that framework, if you could.
Sure. Okay. And so these are, again, they answer primal questions in your audience's mind. That's why there's seven stories. And story number one is all about creation and origin. How did this start? What was the inciting incident? Why did we move forward to build this company, this product, this movement? What was the creation origin story? Story number two is all about our identity, values, and beliefs. Who are we as people? What are the highest aspirations we have when it comes to values? What are things that we will never violate? What are things that we will always hold sacred? Story three is all about the big idea. And the big idea is simply that central organizing principle that binds everything else that we do together. Now, if we go back to somebody like the FedEx's big idea is absolutely positively overnight. That's the first big idea. Google, in its early days, the big idea was to organize the world's information. That was the big idea, and then that's how they built the initial part of the company. Story number four is the enemy we face, and the enemy we face is either something we fight against or we fight for. So we can fight against childhood poverty, or we can fight for adult literacy. Right. And so how do you position it? You don't have to be. So one way is a negative force. And sometimes that's what it gets. You got to get people angry about something, to get them to move forward. So it's an enemy. We got to fight them. Or it could be something that we fight for, fight against or fight for. And ultimately, if you're going to do it, my belief is that, you have to harness that anger, but then you have to turn it into positive energy and turn it away from something that you're against, and then turn it towards something that you're for, and usually the opposite side of the same coin. It just is. We can say that we fight against terrorism worldwide, but if you get to the root causes of terrorism, like no one's pro-terrorism. I don't think even Al Qaeda is pro-terrorism. They in their minds think of themselves as freedom fighters. And in the book, I actually say one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And it depends on how you view that story. And so ultimately, when we go to that enemy we face, it is about to invoke polarity, but I'd rather you come on to the positive side of it eventually. And that you're going to bring a lot more people to something that's positive as far as your movement than to something that's negative. Story number five is all about the mighty wins. And the mighty wins in this case is simply this recognition that most startups, most beginning people who start movements and such, they go out and they build the product, build the company, build the movement without ascertaining the direction, availability, and power of the wind to power their boat. And every movement company, I say, is a sailing ship. And sailing boats need power to wind to power their ships, ship sails. And these winds are ultimately the six macro forces. And so they are societal forces: societal, technological, environmental, economic forces, political, and legislative forces. Now, if you're counter to one of these trends, you're going to have a really difficult time. Really difficult time. If you, back in the 1890s, the primary motor we can call it that, of transportation was the horse. The horse. And in fact, in the mid 1890s, it was the great horse manure crisis that was going on in all the world's major cities, because the bigger the city grew, the more transportation was needed to bring goods and people and all things, and the more horses. And the horses, they're producing gallons of urine and massive pounds of manure all over the place. So at that rate, New York would be covered in 30 feet of horse manure by the 1920s. That's what would happen, right? So the cities were doomed. And so if you had bet on that trend, what you would have not recognized is the counter trend to that in the advent of the internal combustion engine. And by the 1870s, 1880s, we had people like Willem Maybach and Gottlieb Daimler and Carl Benz and lots of other people building luxury motor vehicles. And they weren't really practical, but, they was this toy for the rich for the most part. By 1908, though, Henry Ford had invented the assembly line, and you could buy the Model T for $825. By the final year of production, you buy that same car 19 years later for $325. It was just the efficiency of that. And that's what allowed for suburbanization to take place. And with suburbanization, we have the mass transportation systems for the highway systems. We have the advent of the fast food enterprises, all based on the trend ignited by the internal combustion engine. Now the poor horse, they suffered a dramatic, cataclysmic unemployment rate. The poor horses are unemployed. Right. And in fact, you can find them now, probably in New York, going around Central Park in a carriage ride, which is a nostalgic thing you might want to do. But you have to be betting on the forces. So what happens is macro forces destroy industries in their wake, and they create industries in their wake. So they create massive opportunities. They create tidal waves of destruction and tsunamis of opportunity. You just have to know which way those trends are blowing. Story number 6 is all about, now, these first 5 stories are the left side of the equation. The left side of the equation. So those 5 stories are believable. The equal sign says, well, then this is the journey we must undertake. And I think I saw a 1955 rendering of the Fortune 500 list. So it's listing of the vast majority of the Fortune 500 in 1955 were not around 40 years later. They failed to keep up with these trends, because if you sit still, the ground continues to move, your markets continue to move. You have to move with them. It's a concept called strategic drift. And unless you move with them, your value propositions are not going to stay relevant. You're not functionally relevant. You're not emotionally significant. So you disappear. But what disappears first is the story. Your product didn't disappear. Your company didn't disappear. The story that you put forward, of what you can do to transform your client, has lost its relevance. And the story dies before anything else dies. And so now you say in this story 6, the journey we must undertake, this is the direction we must go. And everybody believes it because the first 5 stories are so truthful. They are perceived to be truthful. Finally, story 7 is all about why we will win. And why we will win takes all the 6 stories and combines it into what I call a meta-narrative. It's a single telling of the story in all its forms. I use an example of that in the last chapter of the book. It's a very short story, but it encompasses all 6 stories before that, with the addition of keystone elements. And what a keystone is things that will guarantee the win. So here's the journey we must undertake. Here's the 5 stories before that, all told in a meta-narrative, and we're going to give you these magic keystones that will ensure us of the win. And there's hundreds of keystones. Here's a very common set of keystones. So God is on our side. Superior people, superior technology, superior strategy. And there's hundreds of these. But those are some very common ones. And this, if people believe this is the leader I'm going to follow. This is the organization I want to be with. And this is why we're going to win. And I'm going to participate in that win. Those are the 7 stories.
Wow. One stinger that I would just want to reply on really quickly is like when you told the whole story about transportation and the horses. And I remember one thing that stuck out to me with Henry Ford as a leadership component is he would ask people, sometimes it's about, like how you're saying here, it's anticipating the challenges people will have. The story is created around that. And I remember one time Henry Ford said, if he asked people what they wanted, they would say a faster horse,
Right.
right? But he
Right.
anticipated what was coming about and how to help that problem in a sense, like how you said, seeing all those components in that aspect. Now, creation. Now, does the seven stories, Kurian, does it happen in order? If I was to create it, if I was to look at what I'm doing today, and if anybody's listening today, if they're trying to think, how do I implement this into my life? What would the first thing you kind of guide them with?
Well, it's not a sequence of stories, it's a cluster of stories because
Okay.
it's a cluster of questions. And your audience is going to ask the question that's most relevant to them at that moment. So the last thing I want you to do is go into a cocktail party or something like that. And hey, wait for it. Brace yourself. I'm going to tell you all seven stories. No, you want to go to the story that's most relevant to them. And you can start with the mighty winds. Listen to me. You know what? One of the things I'm going to tell you is that on an investment basis, the baby boomers are driving investment returns right now because of all the things they're buying and such. But the front end of those baby boomers, they're in their early 70s now. They're in their early 70s. And the average 70-year-old doesn't consume a whole bunch of new fridges and stoves and homes and things like that. They're tailing off. But don't worry. Generation Z, the millennials, are bigger than the baby boom generation. Did you know that? Now I've got a story. Now I got a story to go through. So we got to bank now on what the millennial generation is going to be needing in the next 20, 30 years, because that's what's going to continue to drive S&P 500 returns.
Wow.
That's the story I start with. You'll still back into the other other six stories to fulfill all the questions that are primal in your audience's head.
What I love is that there is, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, but there's a very good, I'd say, an integrity in the communication that you're talking about, because you give the seven stories that you're prompting everyone to kind of dive into and to ask these powerful questions. But at the same time, it's never kind of robotic, right? It's never like, because robotic things that in that sense, we're taking it just on what we want to do. I want to go step 1, 2, and 3, but you're once again guiding how you answer that question. I love it. There's so much integrity on it, because once again, you're coming as a servant. You're coming to serve your audience and say, what story are they asking right now? What story can I tell them to help them what they're asking? So it might be creation origin, it might be mighty winds, it might be big idea, but we're approaching it in a sense to serve the audience, but also to listen better, but to be ready to respond.
Yeah. And when we serve the audience, there's different levels of serving. At the very beginning, it's about engaging the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because until you have their attention, you have nothing else. So what they buy at the very beginning is that they pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're buying. They're paying through their attention. So right. In order to command that attention, you have to have something that engages, and it's got to be entertaining, and it's got to be intriguing, and it has curiosity built into it, suspense. There's a lot of different things. There's opportunity. There could be hundreds of things you could have, but you want to engage that audience because you want them to continue to pay attention.
Yeah. Awesome. This is a totally random thought, but I thought I interject it really quickly. I just thought if we talk about movies and you think about like comics, I have 4 young children and we're watching like superheroes, and it's so interesting. They're standing out now. Like, who would ever picture, if I was to give the principals, go put on some colorful tights with a cape and go outside and go run around the neighborhood. And the principle of that, they're going to say, no, Dad. But when they get the story of what that person is, they can embody themselves in being the hero and being the person that overcomes, then they're very willing to put on a costume, in a sense. So a total random thought that came around. Maybe it's just the dad in me, but I'm just trying to connect that for anyone listening here, like how you're saying the power of story, and to start with engagement where they can actually see themselves engaged in that story.
Yeah, and the difference between put on those tights and the cape and here's the Marvel character you'd be playing is you have imbued the values of that hero. and the adventure of that hero and the mission of that hero in your prospect, in this case, your child's mind.
Right. I'm actually just going right through the 7 stories right now. The creation, the origin, like how you said, the values, right? The big
Yeah.
idea, the identities, the beliefs. Look at all of that, guys. It's right there written out in Kurian 7 stories. It's
Yeah.
actually written all out. The mighty winds, the journey you must have. So it could be from a perspective of Marvel hero. It could be from a perspective of industry changes. Regardless of what happens in times, it's still
Yeah,
relevant.
comic book characters have all of this contained, all 7 stories. In fact, anything that is significant to you that you can relate has those 7 questions answered through 7 stories. So Batman, his parents get killed, right, by a criminal. And ultimately the thing with Batman, the ultimate value with Batman, values of Batman is vengeance. He is the guy that's going to set things straight and make sure the bad guy pays. That's the central value in a Batman story.
True. Well, I love how it kind of transpires and kind of goes through different industries, because it's not limited to just one person that could be listening today. Everyone will take a bit and they can actually internalize this and actually implement it, I'd even say, into their life today. At Leaderseeds, we love the whole aspect of taking a big idea, a big concept, but really putting it into action today.
Yeah.
One question I'd love if you were kind of working or just talking, having a conversation with maybe somebody listening right now at a coffee shop, and you was about to pay the bill, coffee was good, breakfast was great. What would that one takeaway be that you would say, do this today? What is one thing we can do today to start this process of the power of story in our communication?
Yeah. Well, the very first thing is a story is useless until it is functionally relevant and emotionally significant to your audience. So you have to understand your audience from a deep motives basis. So I say most of my clients, my startup clients, can tell me what they're selling, but they can't tell me why their clients are buying. And I don't care what products they're buying. I want to understand the motives behind buying that product. You can buy a brand new coat for a functional purpose of keeping yourself warm, or a status purpose, completely different, of looking great and fashionable for that party you're going to. And those are completely different things. Now, maybe it's warm and fashionable. Wow, double whammy then, right? And then it's a stack of motives that is solved by the value propositions in that coat. So you have to understand your audience better than your audience understands themselves. Go back to your 14-year-old daughter telling you about that $1,200 car she's going to buy. You're scared to death. She is ecstatic, but you have to unravel the story that she's telling in order to really be able to convince her this is a bad idea.
Wow. So there you have it, guys. That's a great place to start. I agree 100%. And I'm going to do that actually today. As soon as we finish this conversation, I'm going to take a chance to pause and try to, I guess what came to mind is try to listen a little bit deeper. Like I said, what is the motives behind that? Really understanding the audience. What I wrote down is understand the audience from a deep motive, right? It's the questions they're currently asking, but it's also the questions that may be stirring that they don't know how to ask, but there's a deep motive, and really understanding if we're coming from that point. Really, I think you've been challenging our listening skills in a sense. So a great takeaway. Thank you so much for that, Kurian. Any last words that you really want to kind of share with anyone at Leaderseeds so that way they don't miss out on anything?
Sure. I've enjoyed this conversation. We had a great conversation today. And I think you're an excellent interviewer, right? Because we went with the flow. And so here's a clear example of what your motive is for this podcast. And what your motive is that you want your listeners to be entertained and informed. And this last little bit is all about, we need a takeaway as well. And so the takeaway, what I'm going to do is, you have a seven story framework. I'm going to send you an infographic and a bunch of other assets to help you put this out to your audience. You can download those for free, audience. But I will also say that the first 5 of your listeners that email me, and I'll send you my email address for your show notes, and tell me that they heard about this on your show, I'm going to send them a free Kindle copy of the 7 Essential Stories.
Wow. Thanks for that. Thanks for your kind words. Thanks. I agree. This is a great conversation. It really blessed me today. But thank you for even, I'd even say, increasing the value of the conversation. You just took it up a notch. But, if you're listening to this, to actually go ahead, send you an email. So the steps are to go ahead. I'll provide the email on the show
Yeah.
notes, but to send you an email saying that they heard the conversation here at Leader Seeds, and you'll send them basically a copy of the book, right? A
Free
Kindle
Kindle
version.
copy of the book. Kindle
Yeah.
copy.
Cool. Cool.
But I'll send them
Yeah.
a free Kindle copy of the book. No problem. Just
Yeah.
for
A Kindle
thank you.
copy of the
Thank you
book.
for listening. Yeah.
Yeah, so they can actually have what the concept of today's conversation was basically all around the power of storytelling, which is based on the book that Kurian put together, and he even shared kind of in some insights, some behind the scenes, some background of how it started. So we've got all of that, so it makes perfect sense to actually get the book in your hand, so you can have it as a tool to reference back to, and even use the podcast to listen to again to reference back to. But once again, to be very clear, go ahead, guys. He said 5, so it's like ready, set, go. Like as soon as you see the email, if you're listening to this, it's probably in the description right now.
Hey.
So shoot him an email because the first 5, he'll actually get you a Kindle version of the book. So thank you so much for that. And you'll also provide an infograph, and we'll have that there also for everyone to download so they can take a look at it. Thank you so much for that. We always kind of close with 2 questions. One is really random, once again, because I think here at Leader Seeds, we really want to know the information you're sharing, but at the same time, we want to continue to build and be intentional with the relationships, because in today's world, we're trying to keep social media still very social. Still very personable, so we can stay connected with people. You open up by answering a great question about stories, a story that stood out to you when you were younger. I would say if we flip the positioning of that, if you're speaking to the younger you, what would be the story you'd want to leave if there was one? And I know that might be a big question, right? That might be a loaded question that could have modules of podcasts, but maybe just first thing that comes to mind, what would be a story that you'd like to leave?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a story so much as the principle, what the principle is. And this sounds very trite to say, and I'm a late bloomer in understanding this. I'm in my mid 50s right now, and it's only in the last few years that I've been practicing this deliberately. And that is this principle of that you are the sole creator of your life. So you can either be victimized by your life or you can create your life. And it is entirely your decisions to move that forward, in a life that you want to live. And as an example, I wrote the book because I wanted to write a book, and I wrote a much better book when I recognized this is not about me. This is about everybody else. So this idea of creation as you as creator is a very solid principle. And then I'd have 5,000 stories behind that to illustrate to my 20-year-old self why that is a true principle.
Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. It allows us listening in to even connect with you much further. I'd even encourage everyone that's listening in, go out there. There'll be a link that's provided to go ahead and check it out on Amazon so that way you can get the tool that Kurian put together, the book here that we're looking at. I'm actually looking at it right now online. So go ahead and click on that link, guys, so you can get that tool in hand. You can see what more it's about. The 7 essential stories charismatic leaders tell. There's an email to go ahead and email Kurian. Come on, you got to be the first 5. Ready, set, go.
Only 5.
Come on.
Only 5.
So come on, you want to be the first 5. I think that adds some excitement to today. It's like I can literally see if I'm listening in, I'm shooting an email as right now, like before the podcast end, the email should have been sent. You want to be the first 5. So go ahead and do that. With that being said, the last question we always like to know, we're always trying to get better here at Leader Seeds. I know for me, that's a daily goal for my personal kind of growing, my personal growth. So here at Leader Seeds, we always want to ask, how was your experience here at Leader Seeds?
This is one of the best podcast interviews I've done, and I'm going to tell you why. You and I were engaged in a mutual dance together. You asked very insightful questions, and we have no script in front of us. And your audience cold. I know my subject matter cold. Now, how do we transform that into an entertaining, informative experience? And we do that through the power of authentic conversation. right? And that's what we did here today. So this is easily, if I were to give you a rating out of 1 to 10, it would be, and I'm not making this up, this would be a 10 because it is an authentic conversation.
Wow, some very kind words, and I just thank you sincerely for that, especially coming from you, your insight, your experience, your background. And I know that you're somebody too that's very authentic, and very true. You won't just kind of throw that around. So thank you so much for those kind words. I agree. I really enjoyed the conversation. You're right. There is no real script. We're just having a great conversation, and we're just curious minds trying to go out there and serve, but we're starting from a place to kind of keep people engaged, especially in today's world. So a lot of things I learned today. For those of you that are listening in, I'd say we always go ahead at the Community Leader Seeds. We don't just take information. We actually go out there. We implement it, right? So go out there, be people that are taking things that we learn and putting action behind it. And with that being said, we'll wrap up for today's episode. So once again, Kurian, thank you so much for joining us in a great conversation today.
Thanks for having me on.